Good afternoon, everyone. I am Cindy Potter. I'm the Secretary of the FSBPT Board of Directors, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining today's regulatory hour, where our topic today is Wait a Minute, Board Meeting Minutes. All of us rely on our board meeting minutes as a record of our organizational events, but there's a lot more that we should be considering, and today's speaker will fill us in on that. Our speaker today is Attorney Dale Atkinson. He is the founding partner and attorney with the Atkinson firm. And for those of you who have joined us for previous webinars, I'm sure he is a familiar face to you. Dale's expertise is in the areas of regulatory and organizational law. And I hope you find today's webinar enjoyable and informative. Dale?
Cindy, thank you so much. And Rich and Cindy, I can see you. You can hear me. And you can see the PowerPoint slides. So
Yes.
we'll be off and running. So let me offer my welcome as well to the FSBPT Regulatory Hour this month to talk about minutes and such an exciting topic. And so my job is to make something that we may not think about enough as exciting as possible. So welcome. And before we get into the content, if you will. A big shout out, thanks for you all that have heard me before, know I do this, and I do this with all sincerity. A big shout out, thanks to the FSBPT Board of Directors, Cindy, you and the team for allowing these regulatory hours to occur. Rich and Jeff and others in the staff side. A big shout out, thanks to you for operationalizing this and providing opportunities to bring your member boards together so that regulators can speak with other regulators about important topics. And so thank you to each of the board and the staff. But the biggest thanks goes to the attendees here today, whether you're an administrator, executive director, whether you're a volunteer board member, inspector, investigator, assistant attorney general, whatever role you play. The world of regulation is under scrutiny. You're not thanked enough. And so I want to give a big shout out, thank you to begin today's session, our regulatory hour today. So a big shout out, thanks, and a recognition on that. And playoff season is here now for the National Hockey League. So we have to have a hockey reference up here. And so feel free to type into the chats to make sure if somebody's already doing it, to make sure I know you're listening, two, you know how to use the chats, and three is you go ahead and put in your team of choice to win the Stanley Cup, and the Capitals just eked in by the smallest margin. So Susan, go Capitals! What a great response. So feel free, by the way, to at any point in time unmute if you have something to say or type something to the chat, and whether it's about hockey or whether it's about regulation or whether it's about minutes, it's entirely up to you. These are really, really exciting opportunities for regulators, as I've mentioned, to talk to other regulators. So to continue since baseball season has now started, and I don't pay attention to baseball, but again, to make sure, now we've got some Red Sox fans here. Red Sox are a hockey team, I think, right? So in Boston, but to make sure that we, again, know how to use the chat feature, go ahead and answer this question about how far the rubber is from home plate, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and this will test some of your knowledge, get you thinking, certainly whether it's about regulation or athletics or anything else. And so we've got a few twos that are coming up here, which is the right answer. And I see a wild guess on that as a number 2. So it gets you participating, it gets you thinking, and it gets you involved, for all, if you will, the right reasons. So how do you feel right now? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Throw some of those in there. There we go. There's a 4 coming up. And so, and I must admit, when I talk about minutes, and I do talk about a lot of different topics relative to the regulatory community, minutes are kind of a hard topic. It's a really hard topic to grasp, I think. Maybe not grasp. It's a hard topic to generalize across the board as to so-called best practices, one of my least favorite phrases, by the way. But so we have a 2 there as well. So I'm kind of feeling like a 1 right now. And so we're going to get into this. We're going to just get at it, about minutes. So I've mentioned participate, chat, unmute, whatever it takes to make sure that we meet your needs. And this is an hour that's worthwhile to you. So diving into the content now, what are minutes? And, if we start with the big picture issue that they're an official record of the actions of a board or committee that took place at a meeting itself. And so it's really obvious. We probably don't mention this enough. We probably don't think about it as often as we perhaps should. But I throw that out to you all now to go ahead and put something in the chat. Are minutes ever discussed as to how minutes should be taken, or how minutes are taken, or how you want minutes to be taken? And is it controversial? Does it ever come up in a sense that we're doing it in a manner that maybe we should change? We're doing it in a manner that works very, very well, or doesn't work very well. So feel free to type in the chats, or if anybody has a hand to raise or wants to speak. I think Rich and the staff are keeping an eye on raised hands. I can see the chats, but I can't necessarily see all of you. So feel free to participate. But I'm kind of curious as to whether this is a matter that's discussed very often, or is it even controversial, or if you don't even pay attention to it. And I might suggest that I look at a lot of meeting minutes from regulatory boards, not just physical therapy, but across the board. And I'm not sure many regulatory boards are paying close attention to what these minutes are. So while I may say and I may try to turn this into an exciting topic, it nonetheless, if I make fun of it, if you will, or try to bring humor to this, it is a really important topic. It is a very important topic for you all to think about. And I'm hoping that some of my remarks will guide our way through something that there is no right answer. And I don't profess to be an expert on minutes, but I do look at them and I do have some opinions that we'll talk about. So what do minutes do? Okay, they serve a historical purpose. There's some legal purposes for them too, to establish what may or may not have been done, what may or may not have passed, and adherence to the proper procedures to get from point A to point B, whatever that might be. And I want to emphasize a little bit about, for government, they serve as a transparency and accountability function. And you all on the line today are government. You operate in the under open meetings laws and open records laws that apply to you. So these minutes are a very important window to the world of regulation. And they can be used, minutes can be used in so many ways that I believe can be beneficial to the boards themselves. So again, I'm emphasizing the importance of this topic, both practically, but potentially legally as well. And so I see some chats coming up, and I'm going to try to go through those a little bit as I go. So not often discussed. I see at least a little bit about that. So let's talk a little bit about, for a minute, what minutes are not. And they're not a record of everything that was said. So we can now go back and say, well, what do you do? Do you record your meetings audio? Do you record your meetings video? Do you streamline them? And we're going to get to a slide in that in a minute. But in the end, the official record is that intended to be what is said by every single person on the board and or staffing or counselor or anybody else that's involved in the board meeting itself. Probably not, but some of you may think maybe it should be or could be. And the ultimate bottom line for minutes is that it is up to each particular board to determine how you want your minutes to read. And those policies, if we can call them that, might change over time. They might change within the same board as new board members come on who have a different opinion as to how these minutes should read. By the way, there are legal issues at stake, so seek legal advice as well as you're discussing these issues themselves. So I've kind of laid some foundation for this already, but to differentiate between the private sector and the government or public sector themselves. Now, FSBPT is a private sector organization, and it may choose to do its board of director meeting minutes differently, and may have different constituents. It is meeting, if you will, but boards themselves, the boards of physical therapy, have certain obligations of, as I've mentioned, open meetings and open records. So you all in the government side of things play by different rules, and you may have different approaches to how you may keep these minutes. And as I've mentioned, and I'll emphasize it a few more times, and that is seek legal advice to make sure you're following the law as related to that. Now, board preference is at stake here. And so I've mentioned that, and I've mentioned it may change over time. How much detail goes into these particular meeting minutes? Voice votes, roll call votes, dissenting votes, discussions, robust discussions, significantly robust discussions, discussions that lasted for 90 minutes. How many words do you want to use to identify the issue that was discussed, and then the ultimate decision that may have been made? And then alternatively, what if there was no decision? What if it's a discussion-based issue that had no motion, that had no end result, that required a motion, a second, a vote, and perhaps dissenting votes and otherwise? And, as I've mentioned, it is very difficult to generalize a rule. So you all are going to have to figure out what works for you, so long as it's in compliance with the legal requirements that are at stake here. So, voice votes, all in favor, aye. All against, you don't hear anything. Is that enough? Do you do roll call votes where you list each person's name, you call each person's name out, and then they vote, in favor of or perhaps then against? And how do the minutes reflect that? So, going back to the motions themselves, who made the motion, who seconded the motions? There's discussion, debate, and there's ultimately a vote. All of that should be reflected. So when I read the minutes, I know what happened. Okay. Now, how you identify, again, these, say, for example, dissenting votes, are they identified by name? Are they identified by a passing of 5 in favor, 2 against? Are they identified by 5 in favor, namely board members so-and-so, and you name the 5 people, 2 dissenting votes, and you name those people as well? That is going to be entirely up to you. Your meetings are open to the public. And so do the minutes have to maintain references to individuals and how they voted? That's probably a jurisdiction by jurisdiction or state by state decision that has to be made, and the law may apply within that. So hard to generalize, but make sure you do follow that advice. But it's going to be up to your preference as to how much detail to put in there. I believe that there needs to be less detail and more focus on the action that was taken. Now, you might use words like, as I've already mentioned, robust discussions or others that tell the reader that this was not just a simple motion that took a few minutes and was either voted up or down. So you're going to have to decide that. No right or perhaps wrong answer unless there's a law that applies, but seek and follow the advice of your counsel and decide how much detail you want or not. So to emphasize, the motion, the maker, the second, the results are going to be in these minutes so that the reader can understand what was passed and who stimulated the motion and ultimately seconded it. Remembering that the seconder of a motion doesn't have to be in favor of it. They can second it to get it to the floor to discuss it. And so there's all sorts of parliamentary rules that apply to this. And again, you'll have counsel at your meetings. I hope you have counsel at all your meetings who can help guide you through that process. But the idea here is the readers outside of the board meetings can understand what happened, who made the motion, who seconded it, and then the ultimate result of passing or not passing, unanimously passing, or again with dissenting votes. So take all that into consideration as it relates to each of your jurisdictions. Now, minutes are the window to the world and the window into the world that you all live in, the regulatory community. Now, I am a big believer of demystifying the regulatory community and having people attend your board meetings and inviting people to your board meetings so that we do not only demystify the regulatory community, but we see that you are human beings making difficult decisions through an appointment process to your boards, ultimately fulfilling the intent of the legislation of public protection. And so the more people that come to your meetings, the better, in my mind. But those that don't come and they read your minutes, now what? How do we look at that? Now think sunset. And so I'm kind of assuming everybody on the line knows what sunset is, but the very, very short version is that these are statutes that are enacted by the legislatures that say a board must every X number of years justify its continued existence. And if it doesn't, it will go out of existence. And these sunset statutes roll over every X number of years. It may be a 5-year period or a 10-year period that the board is under the scrutiny of the legislature to justify its continued existence. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because your minutes can tell the story of what the board is and is not doing and help you throughout this sunset process. And so just go back to the slide quickly. And so you can create minutes that are detailed enough without over detailing it, but detailed enough to tell the reader that you know what you're doing as a board, that you understand your mission, you understand the intent of the legislation, and that those minutes over the course of time can form the packet that allows you to respond to sunset review. And if I were building something from the ground up, even without a sunset statute, I would still create an annual report that includes the minutes of every meeting, along with an introduction and a conclusion to say, this booklet identifies what it is we undertook throughout the year, and we understand what we're doing. Now, we all have to admit that legislators don't necessarily know what boards do, even though they enact the statutes. Licensees don't necessarily know what boards do. The academic community may not. The trade associations may not. And sometimes boards and board members themselves may be not aware of the formalities of what boards should and shouldn't do. And so these minutes are a way, again, of identifying and focusing on what it is they do. So what it is you do as a regulatory board. So what should you include in your minutes? So we'll get down more into the weeds of taking these minutes. So your call to order, time and date, roll call of who is in attendance, adopt the agenda, identify that you have a quorum, maybe introductions of the staff, notice, and the fact that you gave notice of the meeting to the public, etc. These should all be in the minutes because you're telling the world that you know statutes apply to you and that you have complied with those statutes. And so quorum issues and vacancies and others, your minutes are a chance to tell the reader, which includes, by the way, perhaps the executive branch of government, that this board has a vacancy, and I'm making this up, this is an example. There's a vacancy in the public member spot, and it's been vacant for 18 months. And at your next board meeting, this board has a vacancy in the public member spot, and it's been vacant for 19 months. I would put that in my minutes to make sure that you are making whatever point to whomever reads this, that there's been a vacancy for a long period of time. So these are examples of how you can maybe subtly identify and create interest in others fulfilling their responsibilities like the executive branch. So this is why I list quorums and vacancies. And if you as your board don't have a quorum because you have vacancies, imagine what those minutes could read like. And everybody knows, I think, if you don't have a quorum, you can't conduct business. You can have some discussions, but you can't conduct any business. You can't make any decisions. And this is what bogs down the regulatory community. When the regulatory community is bogged down and boards cannot take action, they are viewed as being ineffective or inefficient. So how do we use these minutes now to make some of these important points that exist? So you're going to have some introductory issues within the minutes themselves that identify this and make the points that you want to make and that can surface out of that. Equally important at every single board meeting and into every single set of minutes, to me, should be your mission, vision, values, If you don't have a mission statement, write one. Okay. Set the time aside as a regulatory board to figure out what is our mission statement, or pull it from the statute, assuming there's some legislative declaration as to why the board exists, and read that into the record every single meeting. Now, everything I'm suggesting right now, by the way, isn't necessarily a gigantic time-consuming process, but it is so important that every set of minutes, I believe, includes some of these issues. So, what is the mission, and why are you reading into the record? You're reading into the record for several reasons. One, to get it into the minutes. Two is to tell the world you know what you're doing, to tell the legislature you know what you're doing, to tell the executive branch and the media or anyone else that's involved that you know what you're doing. And most importantly, it's to tell yourselves that this is our mission. This is our focus. We are not a trade association. We don't promote the profession. We live in a world of public protection, fulfilling the intent of the legislature. Think of the words that you like and put it in those minutes every single time right up front, so that, as I've mentioned, everybody knows that you know what you're doing, and equally important, you know that what you're doing. And so that potentially could have turned into a Yogi Berra quote, I think, as I was heading down that road. But so mission, vision, and values, declared conflicts, right? Which right up front, you should ask for those and put that in the minutes. You board members may not know of a conflict until other matters surface and names perhaps are disclosed, or issues are disclosed, or entities are disclosed, but right up front, seek that. If I were the chair of your board, I would go over an agenda review and some of the time frames. Okay. So how often do you all meet? Think about that. And how efficient are these meetings themselves? A very important aspect, but again, the minutes will reflect that, and the minutes will tell the world that you understand what that is. So what else to include? This is kind of back to the data issue, and reading into the record matters that tell the world how efficient you are. And I might suggest perhaps for some of the regulatory community, it might indicate some inefficiencies, but there's nothing wrong with that. That identifies where your boards can focus. So let's talk about data. Applications, okay? Since the last board meeting, we've received X number of applications. This many were granted, this many were denied, this many remain pending, and the average days to the issuance of from receipt of complete application to issuance of licensure. You could put in there, by the way, that there seems to be an increase in time frames to get transcripts, primary source transcripts directly from educational programs, or whatever the issues may be, to help identify why the granted or the average days to issuance is taking longer than you want it to be. Okay. And so it's all about reading these, remembering that when the legislatures are scrutinizing boards and they are reading minutes, which they should be, the words on the paper are telling them the whole story. So build your minutes in a manner to tell the story that is an accurate reflection not only of what occurred, but if there are inefficiencies perceived, those inefficiencies don't necessarily always fall on the board's side. It's on the applicant's side, or it's on the educational program side, or a combination thereof. And you know that FSBPT and other groups that I represent, like FSBPT, have programs to help increase the efficiencies of board decision-making processes, or provide data to you so that you can increase those efficiencies. So take advantage of those. And while I'm on the topic, by the way, and a little bit off the slide here a little bit, but I also would suggest that your organization, FSBPT, is on every single board agenda, and that you bring the rest of the board members up to you. Whomever is reporting on this brings the rest of the board members up to date on your organization. And I can say with a lot of confidence, representing a lot of FSBPT-like groups, and I can't remember if I introduced myself, but Cynthia did, and identified some expertise, but I represent a whole bunch of FSBPTs. And I can tell with a lot of confidence that there are many board members back in your member board, your states, that don't know much about your organization, about FSBPT. And they know maybe, there's an exam, yep, and that exam is validated, yep, and we can throw around big words like psychometrics, okay. But what else? What other programs exist? So I strongly suggest that every board agenda identify FSBPT and bring members up to date about whatever activities that you're aware of. They may be short reports, or it may be I went to the annual meeting and it was the best meeting ever. Oh, I went to a regulatory hour and heard the best speaker ever talk about minutes. Whatever it is that you want to say is to get that in the record. And then you might have board members that say, well, what is FSBPT? And then you know that can be a discussion item that is identified and included in the minutes itself. So a little bit off topic from the slide, but an important aspect to continue to identify your organization as a go-to entity that can help you do your jobs and not make decisions for you, but can help you do your jobs in an efficient manner as possible. So we talk about applications. We can say the same thing about renewals. How many were received? How many were granted? How many were denied? How many remain pending? Average days to issuance? And this generally is a delegation question. So who makes the decision to grant the license or to renew the license? And is it a board decision? Is it a staff decision? And how do we find the answer to that? We go to your policies. So if the board delegates to staff the authority to make decisions, let's say on renewals, so long as there's no red flags on the renewal application, great. But this data can form the basis for efficiencies, as well as telling yourselves how efficient you are or inefficient you are following these processes. And it can then ultimately stimulate changes to policy to try to make you as efficient as possible. So I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm hoping that this data does exist, and that if it doesn't, the board can ask staff, your execs and others, to make sure that this data is available at every single board meeting itself. We can go down the enforcement side or the discipline side. Same thing: complaints received, complaints resolved, how many remain pending, average days of receipts to resolution. And what I see happening, by the way, in the legislative world right now, with the increased scrutiny on the regulatory community and regulatory boards themselves, is enactment of statutes that start to place timeframes on the process of receiving and resolving a complaint. 180 days from receipt, it has to be resolved. Now, some of these statutes don't say the consequences of what happens if you don't meet the 180 days, but the point is that the perceived inefficiencies of government perhaps can be addressed through minutes. And as I've mentioned and emphasized, the more you read this data into the record, the more you yourselves as the regulatory board will realize where you might want to focus your time, adjust your policies, and make this as an efficient as possible process. Now, I will admit that it's easy to say all these things and it's easy to just throw all these around. But if you spend time generatively thinking about these issues, perhaps you, the regulatory community, can come up with solutions that work within each of your jurisdictions. And I understand there's standalone boards, composites, and there's departmentalized. So you may not have as much control over a lot of the things I'm suggesting, but take this to heart and think about this. Now, the other issue related to data is, number of phone calls, visits to the website, how long people stayed on your website, where they navigated onto your website, newsletters, social media stats, anything you can think of that help, as I've mentioned, tell the world what it is you do, but tell yourselves what it is that you do. And so minutes are going to capture that and can, again, paint a picture that will help you somewhere down the road. So I don't know if anybody is doing all of this, these last 4 or 5 slides, where you're reading these into the record, but feel free to type into the chats that we're doing it and it works. We're not doing it. We don't have the data. It's too hard. We don't have enough staff, whatever might come up. But as best you can, maybe these are pointers that you can use to your advantage. There will always be potential opportunities to go to executive session. Your minutes should reflect when you went, there's a motion to go into executive session, the time, and the statutory authority to go into executive session. You don't need to say why, but it's to discuss personnel matters. It's to seek legal advice or confer with our attorneys. But you're going to have a record of going in and then coming out of executive session. And in doing some research and thinking about minutes and thinking about today's presentation, I had done some research, and this is anecdotal because I didn't have time to look up the statute, but I believe at least in one jurisdiction, the requirement in executive session is to record executive session. Now, the recordings are not available to the public, but I believe that procedure, that statutory requirement, is probably intended to ensure that if needed, these tapes can be reviewed to ensure that what you're talking about in executive session is actually subject to executive session. So don't take that to the bank, but the idea here is that know what executive session is, know why you're going into it, have the minutes reflect that, and then while you're in executive session, you need to know, and you're going to get legal advice on this, as to how we keep minutes of executive session, if at all. And at some point in time, those matters discussed in executive session may need to be acted upon in open session, whatever the circumstances arise. So executive session, again, is an important aspect of allowing you to operate as a regulatory board. How the public can and cannot see that is the important piece to today's topic of minutes and how a record of the board activities is undertaken. So we've talked about this already. Get your advice about what minutes are taken in executive session, if at all, and who keeps those minutes. Likely the attorney, but it could be statutory required to do other things, as I mentioned in that one particular jurisdiction. So get advice and follow that advice as well. Now, I mentioned at the beginning here, and I think a couple of messages or chats came up, so I'm going to try to scroll down to get those too. So Georgia does record executive session. Excellent. Thank you for that. And feel free to unmute and speak if these are worthy of or beneficial to all the attendees. Semi-annual trainings to discuss. Oops, sorry. Oops, now I've lost that. But read the chats, everybody, so I don't bog us down in me trying to read those. But and the historical reference on a topic and others. So a couple of comments or chats that are being made. Let's all learn from each other. And anytime I do these regulatory hours, I rely upon you all to throw out your comments either in chat or speak up. So now, so what do you do on the recording basis of your meetings minutes themselves? And I've mentioned this at the start. You audio record, you video, you streamline. Does somebody take notes? And what do you do with the recordings? If you do record your board meeting minutes or your board meetings themselves, and how do those meet then your obligations, if at all, related to minutes? Now, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I might suggest that does an audio recording of government regulatory board meetings suffice as minutes? So can I have an agenda? Can that agenda note times when each new agenda item was referenced? And if your meeting is 6 hours long, maybe those recordings are your minutes. And the reason I ask that is because at some point in time, somebody makes a decision that our 6 hour meeting is going to be distilled down into X number of pages, right? The minutes are then recorded, and maybe they're only the motions and the seconds and reference to discussions and a vote. And does that tell the full story that you, as a regulatory board, want the world to see as the window to your worlds of regulators? And again, this isn't going to be a board by board, state by state decision you're going to make. But at some point in time, does somebody say, and this is likely a staff person, say, well, what Rich said was important. We better put that in the note, in the minutes, but what Dale said isn't. So we don't want that in there. These are difficult questions, but this is a philosophical discussion all the board should have as to what do we expect out of our minutes. And if you do record, what do you do with those recordings? And do you delete them after the minutes are approved at perhaps the next meeting and you record over them? Can the public listen to those recordings or not? And again, if anybody wants to type into the chat, do you streamline live your meetings, riveting television? So I can go in between periods of the hockey game, I can go watch a regulatory board meeting. So do you stream that online on a live basis and let everybody watch, which is fine too. And some boards actually do that. So how does this come into play now into the record keeping ultimately of what it is the board undertook? And as we've already talked about, the minutes are your legal record of board activities. So certainly keep that in mind and ask some questions as related to this suggested recording or what you do with those. So the next meeting and approval and amendments of the meetings. So let's talk about approval of the minutes themselves. Okay, likely at the next meeting, right? And what do you do if there are amendments to this? If there are corrections, if there are edits or anything else, do you get input from board members? And don't forget that your board meeting minutes are not public until they're approved, most likely. And my understanding and a little bit of research that we did in my office, as well as some meeting minutes are made public even before they're approved, and then ultimately they're continued to made public after the approval itself. So if there are edits, if there are additions or deletions, how do you deal with that? And do you get input from the board members themselves? And importantly for everybody on the line today, do you even read these minutes? And you should. This is part of your obligations, if you will, as a board member to ensure that these minutes accurately reflect the activities of the board itself. So you're going to have to deal at some point in time with how do you approve these, but what do you do with these amendments and who is able to suggest the amendments that might surface. So you're going to eventually have that. Now, are your minutes easy to find? You post them on your websites. Here's where we did a lot of research in my office, again, to prepare for today, but also just in general as we try to keep up with the regulatory community. And I will say this is that board meeting minutes sometimes are very difficult to find, and sometimes we can never find them. And by the way, we know what we're looking for in my office. So imagine if you are the public and you actually want to read board meeting minutes, or more importantly, imagine you're the legislator and you want to read these board meeting minutes because the issue of perhaps consolidation of boards, deregulation is surfacing. How do I find these minutes? And so they're not necessarily easy to find. Some are easier than others. And I want to say this with fun in mind that we tried to look up a lot and we kind of came up with our good, bad, and the ugly. So this is my staff's recommendations to me about how easy it is to find your board meeting minutes and reading some of your minutes and come up with those. So I don't want anyone to be offended. I want this to kind of make us think a little bit. It might make us chuckle a little bit as well, but to make us think about the good and the bad, the ugly as to the examples of board meeting minutes. And so by the way, if anybody has any questions or comments, put them into the chat or get ready, because as we wrap up here on some of these. And these are observations again by staff. So this is, while we might chuckle a little bit here, this is also a very serious issue. Mississippi's website doesn't contain board minutes. Okay, now this is our conclusions. They may be on there. We couldn't find them. And FAQs contain no information about how to obtain them. So now we ask ourselves, well, what do we make out of this? And I've already mentioned this, but I'm going to say it again. And that is, if someone wants to find these, and that someone could be a practitioner, it could be an applicant, it could be a student, but it could be a legislator, it could be a lawyer who's representing someone. And this will create questions if they're hard to find, okay? And so the conclusion staff drawn was that they're not on the website, but maybe they're there and we couldn't find them. Wisconsin has agendas for most of their meetings, and some of those agendas contain draft minutes from previous meetings, but I couldn't find a link to the approved minutes. So we'll ask ourselves now is, well, once those minutes are approved, that's the legal record that should be used to identify what boards have done, accurately reflect what the boards have done as well. So I want to emphasize that this is our research, and if we couldn't find them, we'll just take these for what they are. So this is just a reaction, and maybe it's helping individuals decide that. So Minnesota's board meetings are easily found; they're up to date, and you can see. And I cut and pasted from emails from staff here, but January's meetings are attached, and so when you see attachments, I could look at these, but. So interesting that in Minnesota, they have a separate category of actions called corrective actions. And so the question now here is, how is this relevant to minutes? Well, what is it that the board is doing? What can be read? And if it's an adverse action or discipline or enforcement, whatever you want to phrase it as, is the public being protected by having access to information? And now whether it's the status of one's license, or whether it's a corrective action that's not considered discipline, which is what Minnesota does, fine. You're going to do what you have to do. Just ensure you're fulfilling the intent of the legislation. You're fulfilling the public protection aspects of this. And public protection, in part, is having data available to the public. So the purpose of a corrective action agreement is to resolve complaints which allege violations of the Physical Therapy Practice Act, when the nature of the violations require direct remediation and does not warrant disciplinary action. So that's cool. So we can read that, we can figure that out, and we now know what a corrective action is. And it's an accurate reflection now of what occurred at the board meeting. But if we see a corrective action referenced in board meeting minutes and it doesn't identify what that is, now one thing is either we're in the dark and we don't figure it out, or we have to contact the board. What's a corrective action? And how does this come into play as to one's good standing as a licensee, as a one's authority to continue to practice versus something else that might occur? So the reason this was brought up is to ensure that readers of minutes that are not sophisticated regulators like all of you understand what words mean, or what phrases mean, or what actions mean, or perhaps don't mean, importantly. So Nevada, if you're on the line, you get an A+ for my staff. Easy to find, amount available to the public. There's links and well-written board meeting minutes. And so Rich, if Nevada's on the line, they get dinner for two at their favorite restaurant in either Vegas or Reno or Carson City. And for Nevada people, I'll call Rich to claim the prize that you have, or go to the next annual meeting and maybe you'll get a dinner at your annual meeting as well. So Georgia gets extra credit points for not only having robust minutes, but they include as an attachment an affidavit regarding closed session. So again, there's another identification of what an outsider read minutes and said these are great. And it provides certain attachments that identify the closed session here. And so Missouri, sorry, and hopefully we chuckle a little bit here, but while information is easy to find on the sites, we couldn't find minutes posted since May of 2023. And the minutes are quite brief. So again, this is a staffing grade, if you will, if that's even of any meaning itself. But the point is that if the minutes haven't been posted since May of 2023 and the outside world, specifically legislators, are looking at this, questions will start to be asked. When does the board meet? How often does it meet? And what has happened, during the course of time in there. These are select issues. These are just random states chosen. There's no method to that madness. That was just some identifying factors that helped us not only get ready for today, but become more educated in our world about how minutes might be drafted. So I want to, as we wrap up here, is conclude that, while we chuckle a little bit and we talked about trying to make this exciting, this is a really important topic, extremely important. So it needs to be I think, not only understood, but discussed as to how it is you want the minutes to reflect the accurate activities of the board itself. Okay. Following the law. So you're going to get legal advice along the way on this. And the minutes can form the basis for this sunset review. So I'm back to just very quickly saying, even if you don't have a sunset review, well-drafted minutes can be a significantly important annual report that I would send to the executive branch of government every single year, even if I didn't have to. So you're sending the governor's office, the appointing authority's office. Here is an annual report from the Board of Physical Therapy of Jurisdiction X. And this is reflective of the activities undertaken. And in a sense, what you're saying is we know what we're doing and we understand our role. And these minutes are a reflection of that. Please read it so that we have, so that we can be, expressive of this. And scrolling down for some chats here as well. So use these minutes whether you have sunset review or not. And it's really important to communicate with not only the executive branch of government, but perhaps the legislative branch of government, whether it's select legislators or whether it's committees or others that are dealing with health, safety, and welfare, or others that relate to regulation of the professions. Perhaps they also get a copy of this annual report. But equally important, you can use them for sunset review. But they have to be well drafted. And I'm hoping that this short hour we're having with us today at least stimulates us to start thinking about this. It's very hard to create templates and other generalized so-called advice, maybe that's the right word, or suggestions that might be used. So does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make regarding this topic? Share with your peers. I'm kind of scrolling back down for this for the chats. Anybody want to unmute and speak or type anything in the chats?
Dale, thank you for all of this information and giving us a different perspective on possible uses for the minutes. And I'm wondering if, in light of all the challenges to regulatory boards and just regulation in general, do you have any examples either from PT or from other professions where they have used minutes or where that's made a difference? And if so, what was the key, was there a key piece of information that was most useful?
I wish I had examples. I've been saying this for, I feel like, quite some time, and I don't know of any examples where they have been used. Sunset reports can be one of your sources to look at to identify. And as I've mentioned, whether you are under sunset review or not, you can go to some jurisdictions that have sunset reviews that have that. But no, I don't have any good examples. I wish I did. I really wish I did about the use of minutes and some annual reports that were sent in that were beneficial. But I will emphasize what Cindy just brought up, and that is you are under scrutiny as a regulatory community, physical therapy boards and other boards. And you all, the regulatory community, should be very proud of what we do. And these minutes should be a reflection of how proud we are that we know what we're doing. And these minutes accurately reflect that. But, Cindy, that's a good question. And that will stimulate me to look a little deeper to see if I can find some as well. I'll be happy to share it with Rich and staff if we can continue on this kind of a dialogue. I think there's another new message, and it says here, thanks, great job, and excellent. It says the Blackhawks are going to win the Stanley Cup in the near future. I think, does it say that somewhere? I'm not sure. So, any other comments or questions that you all want to discuss? I'm hoping this was helpful. I apologize that there's no template, as I've mentioned, that we can talk about, but it will differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But you all think about this and stimulate your board to talk about this. Stimulate your board to say, is this how we want to have our minutes reflected, not only to ourselves, but more importantly to the outside world, which includes legislators and the public. So other questions or comments, I will get back. I will move on to my and I see a caps. Holy cow. Caps, that's like a cap, right? That's what you wear in your head. That has nothing to do with hockey. Go cap, that was excellent. I will move on, or I will at least express my big sincere thanks for everybody who was here. You spent an hour of your time. Thank you so much to the board of directors and staff for allowing these to happen. But big shout out thanks to each and every one of you for what you do for public protection and spending some time with us. Please feel free to send in comments to Rich and the staff if this is helpful. And also, please feel free to send in suggested topics for future regulatory hours. So, Cindy, I'll turn it back to you. But if anybody has any other questions, I'll be happy to unmute and answer those. But thank you for having me, Cindy. Big thanks to the board of directors. Rich, thanks for what you guys do.
Dale, thank you for all of this information that keeps us prepared and proactive in all of the various challenges that we're facing today. And thanks to everybody for attending today. Please keep your eye on the schedule for the webinars. There'll be more upcoming. We hope that you continue to come and attend. And also just a reminder that many of our previous webinars are recorded and always accessible to you on the website. So don't forget to look there if you need some additional resources. And I just want to say thanks again, and everyone have a good afternoon. Bye.